Last Tuesday, I was grabbing coffee with an old colleague named Maya. She's the quintessential modern success, a high-level software architect with a six-figure salary and a glass-walled condo in the city. But when she opened her laptop to show me something, it wasn't a new code base. It was a meticulously detailed spreadsheet titled Household Specialization ROI. She told me, with a completely flat affect, that she was planning to quit her job by the end of the year to become a traditional homemaker. I expected a story about burnout or a sudden religious awakening, but Maya just shrugged. To her, this wasn't about finding herself or embracing 1950s nostalgia. She described her move as a de-risking maneuver. She'd calculated that in the volatile economy of 2026, her independence had become a liability, a high-maintenance asset with diminishing returns. She wasn't looking for a soulmate. She was looking for a stable production partner to lower her survival entropy. The most striking part was her transition from talking about her career to talking about her new traditional arrangement. One moment, she was discussing AI integration. The next, she was explaining why she was willing to trade her professional autonomy for domestic security as if she were closing a corporate merger. When I asked if she felt she was losing her freedom, she gave me a look that was both pitying and profoundly detached. "Freedom is expensive," she said. "In this market, I'd rather have a hedge." That instantaneous shift from the pinnacle of modern independence to a cold, clinical embrace of traditional roles left me stunned. It wasn't a romantic choice, it was a strategic retreat. Makes you wonder, is the sudden surge in traditional values we're seeing in 2026 a genuine cultural revival? Or is it just the sound of millions of people performing a desperate, non-moral survival calculation? As it turns out, the data suggests that for the majority of us, traditionalism is no longer a choice of the heart. It's a cold-blooded audit of what it takes to simply stay alive.
And that phrase you used, that cold-blooded audit, that is exactly what this deep dive is all about. Our whole mission here is to really dig into that hypothesis, the idea that this surge in traditional values and specialization is fundamentally a strategic economic survival calculation. It's a defense mechanism.
That's a huge claim, though, because we're suggesting this isn't some kind of cultural pendulum swing. It's that the economic volatility has gotten so high that specialization, which used to feel, restrictive, is now the most rational choice for security.
Absolutely. And to tackle that, we've pulled together three really linked streams of source material. First, we've got a hard economic outlook for 2026. It details the specific pressures on the middle class.
Okay.
Second, we're going to examine the behavioral economics of the dating market. Basically why it's become so high effort and frankly low return.
And the third.
And finally, we'll look at the social and legal theories that sort of position these traditional roles as a kind of contractual defense mechanism against existential risk. It's about analyzing how economic stagflation, a collapsing dating market, and this need for security all feed into this rise of traditional gender specialization.
I'm stuck on a phrase that Maya used. She said she was looking for a partner to lower her survival entropy. What does that actually mean in this context?
It's a perfect metaphor, actually. In physics, entropy is just a measure of disorder, of randomness.
Right.
So in a household, survival entropy would be all the energy, the time, the emotional effort you have to expend just to keep things running.
Yeah.
Paying debts, managing a career, finding childcare, all of it, the mental load.
So as the world gets more chaotic.
Exactly. When economic and social volatility goes up, your survival entropy goes through the roof. So Maya's choice, this shift to specialization, it's an attempt to drastically reduce that internal disorder. You create these rigid, complementary roles to lower the cost of just staying afloat.
So her high-level career requires this massive energy output, but the returns are getting smaller because of the economy. So the most efficient move is to stabilize the domestic side to lower the total household entropy.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's start the audit where she did then, the economic driver. What about the 2026 environment makes professional independence feel like a liability?
We have to start with the backdrop, which the Apollo Academy Outlook paints as a brief stagflation.
Stagflation, that's the ghost of the 1970s, right?
It is. It's the thing that haunts central banks. You've got softening growth happening at the same time as persistent, sticky inflation.
Which is just that awful feeling where prices for everything essential keep rising, but the opportunities, the wage increases, they're all slowing down. The sources mention things like tariffs and immigration restrictions are part of that drag on growth.
Correct. And while growth slows, inflation is expected to stay above target at 3%. And that's the key. That is what keeps interest rates higher for longer, which for the average person just means borrowing money for a car, for a house. It all stays painfully expensive.
And if you're already struggling with debt, that combination it's just incredibly hostile.
The outlook does mention a possible AI-fueled reacceleration down the road, but the immediate risk seems pretty high. They put the consensus for recession risk in 2026 at 30%.
Which isn't a guarantee, of course, but it's high enough that it forces millions of households into this constant state of being on alert.
And when people are on alert, they start making conservative choices, protective choices.
And you have to look past just the aggregate risk to the structural risk. The most defining feature of this economy is what they call the K-shaped recovery. It's this persistent divergence.
Strength at the top, strain at the bottom.
Continued strength and wealth accumulation at the very top, and just persistent deep strain everywhere else.
That K-shape is the great polarizer, isn't it? It means that if you're on a middle-class path, like an architect, like Maya, someone outside that immediate AI boom, your position has become incredibly precarious. The whole economic experience is structurally different for you than for those at the top.
And that pressure is just made worse by these immediate, unavoidable headwinds facing the middle and lower income brackets. And nothing is more impactful than the restart of federal student loan payments in May 2025.
That's a staggering number of people. It's something like 45 million Americans.
It's close to 20% of the entire population.
20%. Also suddenly having this significant monthly payment just reappear on their budget right as we head into this 2026 forecast.
And it's the scale of the mid-range debt that's so telling. It really highlights the stress on the middle class. We aren't just talking about a few people with, $200,000 in debt.
Right.
The data shows 11 million households have balances between $10,000 and $25,000. And another 9 million are carrying between $25,000 and $50,000.
So that's 20 million households just in those two mid-ranges. These aren't small amounts. They're the kinds of balances that just fundamentally stop you from being able to build a savings buffer.
It strips away all the discretionary income, the very money a professional might need to maintain that single independent lifestyle right when the cost of living is already going up.
It makes you incredibly exposed to any kind of economic shock.
Exactly. And the data confirms consumers are already highly distressed. Even before the full impact of the student loan restart, delinquency rates were rising across the board.
And it's not just that notable jump in student loan delinquencies the report mentions. The sources say credit card and auto loan delinquencies are climbing to levels described as global financial crisis level territory.
Just think about the psychological impact of that for a second. If you are a middle-class worker today, your debt risk profile for things other than your house is essentially mirroring the extreme stress of the 2008 collapse, that feeling of precarity. That's what creates the need for a hedge.
And the savings data just makes it worse.
Yeah.
You can see the K-shape right on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
The lowest income households, that bottom 20th percentile, they've seen zero growth in savings in 6 years.
No buffer at all.
None. Meanwhile, the higher income levels have seen a notable spike in savings compared to 2019.
So if you're lower or middle income, you're facing GFC-level debt risk with no savings, all while inflation and interest rates are high. It's a picture of intense financial fragility.
Then the sources talk about how wage growth has completely reversed, which just reinforces that fragility. There was a positive trend for a while from 2016 to 2022. The lowest wage earners were actually seeing the strongest wage growth.
Right, there was some hope for climbing the ladder. But over the last 2 years, that trend has, and this is a quote, completely reversed.
So now the highest income earners, the ones already at the top of the K, are seeing stronger wage growth than everyone else.
It reinforces the polarization. The people at the bottom are falling further behind right when their debt payments are coming back and their delinquency rates are spiking. It's the definition of a pressure cooker.
Okay, so that covers the personal side of things.
Yes.
Debt, savings, wages. How does this connect to the corporate environment that's driving that wealthy arm of the K? It all comes back to AI, doesn't it?
It all comes back to AI. It's identified as the central macro force. It's driving all the business spending, all the market performance, all the investor interest. But this concentration has created this unprecedented market polarization.
We're talking about the S&P 500 being basically hollowed out. I mean, it used to represent broad market diversification.
Not anymore. The sources note that the 10 biggest stocks now make up a staggering 41% of the entire market capitalization.
41%.
And we need to unpack what that means for the professional middle class. The divergence is stark. Profit margins are, quote, rising for the Magnificent Seven, that handful of tech giants, and at the same time, they're declining for the S&P 493.
The other 493 companies.
Everyone else. And it's the same for earnings expectations for 2026. They're being revised up for the Mag 7 and down for the rest of the market.
So if you're a project manager or an architect like Maya, and your job depends on the health of the S&P 493, you are fundamentally working for a shrinking slice of the economic pie. Your professional security is declining relative to that tiny, hyper-concentrated AI sector.
And here's the really concerning part for the broader economy. Growth in non-AI business spending. So that's non-residential spending, excluding information processing equipment.
So everything else?
Everything else. That growth is basically at zero. The entire broader U.S. economy is reliant on AI's performance. Everything else is flatlining.
This means if your career is outside that Mag 7, that AI sphere, which is most professionals, you're facing this high-risk personal balance sheet.
High debt, low savings, GFC-level delinquency risk.
Combined with declining professional security and stagnant wage growth.
The message is crystal clear. The economy is highly polarized, and the volatility is structural. Relying on your own professional independence, especially in the middle class, has become a high-maintenance asset with diminishing returns. Just like Maya said, it takes immense energy just to stay in the same place.
Which seems to mandate a strategic de-risking maneuver like household specialization. If you compare one partner who is in that specialized high-income world, say a Mag 7 tech worker, with another partner who stabilizes the domestic unit, the household suddenly becomes much more resilient.
It shifts the risk. Instead of two people both exposed to this polarized market, they specialize. One becomes the primary asset accumulator, and the other becomes the primary risk reducer, managing the budget, cutting expenses, stabilizing the foundation. It's a portfolio management decision for your life.
That makes the economic rationale really airtight. When the outside world is volatile, you maximize efficiency internally. But as we move into the next section, the sources suggest this choice only seems rational because the other path to security, finding a stable, committed partner, has also collapsed.
That's the critical link. If the economy is hostile, but the dating market is, efficient and easy, people would probably still find partners easily. But the sources show that the modern dating market is seen as incredibly high effort and extremely low return. And that's what pushes people toward these more calculated arrangements.
Okay, let's start with the anecdotal side of that. The sources pull from user reports, and the language they use is just. It's about profound exhaustion. Words like exhausting, a shit show, not worth the effort. They're everywhere.
The emotional cost is clearly immense. One user literally said, "I finally thrown my hands in the air and admit defeat after 3 years of active dating."
3 years.
Another one only found peace after just deleting all the apps and cutting off connections with people who were only looking for something casual. The amount of time and emotional capital you spend searching, only to be constantly disappointed. That's a form of massive, uncompensated friction.
And the core of that frustration seems to be what the sources call the commitment paradox. People say they want something serious, but their actions suggest the exact opposite.
And this frustration is, it's deeply gendered in the reports. Women talk about feeling constantly manipulated. They use phrases like guys purposely lying to get vagina or ghosting at the slightest bit of being serious.
Just exhaustion from having to filter through all these profiles, trying to find a real commitment, only to still end up with someone who pivots to a late-night hookup request.
And on the other side, you see men expressing this intense frustration that their stable, high-effort life isn't valued. They talk about having a good job, a stable life, goals, but feeling like they have nothing to offer a woman.
Yeah, I saw one quote from a man who said he helps his friends find partners and then is left wondering what TF happened to his own chances. He feels completely overlooked.
And this points directly to what everyone acknowledges as the top 10% dynamic. Both men and women seem to recognize that the market is just heavily skewed. When women are looking for commitment, they often focus on that top 10% of guys who, by definition, have massive market power.
And the rational response from that top 10% is laid bare in the sources. One quote says, "Attractive guys generally don't settle down at a young age because they can fuck lots of attractive girls, and he's not giving that up for any one of them."
So the highest market value partners are rationally incentivized not to commit because the market makes it so easy for them to maintain high optionality.
Which leaves the average well-meaning person, man or woman, in this impossible position. They're either dealing with intentional deception or competing for a tiny pool of people who are actively leveraging the system to delay commitment forever.
The search just becomes long, inefficient, and emotionally punishing.
Which brings us to the economic theory of dating. We need to move from the anecdotal shit show to the surprisingly cold models that explain why the market works this way.
Exactly. Economists don't look at this through emotion. They use concepts like pizzazz, search frictions, and efficiency.
Right.
The models treat dating as a continuous learning process. People move between being single, dating, and married, and they're always learning about a partner's compatibility. But the main driver of the inefficiency is what they call vertical heterogeneity.
Pizzazz. I
I
love that they use that word. It's so unacademic.
Yeah.
But it's basically market value or perceived attractiveness.
Right.
What does having high pizzazz do in the model?
Well, high pizzazz agents have a higher time cost of dating. They have more potential matches, so their time spent learning about any one person is more valuable. So the model predicts they will be more selective. Their opportunity cost is huge.
That makes total sense. If you have what feels like infinite options on your phone, spending 3 months with someone who's just pretty good feels like a massive waste of time. You could have been dating 3 other people who might have been perfect.
And this selectivity shows up as a breakup threshold. A high pizzazz agent will only keep dating someone as long as their belief about their compatibility stays above a certain level. And crucially, the model shows this threshold is strictly increasing in their own pizzazz.
So the better your options are, the faster you will dump someone if things slow down or hit a snag. That explains the anecdotal feeling of being ghosted the moment things get the slightest bit of serious.
It might not even be malice. It could just be the rational economic decision of a high pizzazz agent whose belief in your compatibility has dipped below their own elevated threshold.
It's treating commitment like an investment that has to constantly beat the expected return of the next best option. You know, I think we need to spend a bit more time on what the sources call the problem of overdating. The model shows that in equilibrium, people date for longer than is socially optimal. That seems counterintuitive. If everyone's so selective, why isn't dating quick?
It leads to overdating because individual agents are selfish in their calculation in a mathematical sense. When you choose to keep dating someone, you only think about your own personal benefit of learning more about them.
You don't internalize the full social cost.
Exactly. What's the social cost?
Well, while you're dating that person, you're unavailable to other potential partners who you might actually be a better match for.
Right. So a hypothetical social planner, something trying to maximize society's total happiness, would actually choose shorter dating times and higher breakup thresholds for everyone. The planner wants people to figure it out fast and move on if it's not perfect, freeing them up for someone else.
That's a fascinating insight. So the emotional investment we make as individuals, staying in a relationship too long, hoping it will work out, is actually an economically suboptimal decision that hurts the whole dating pool by keeping good matches off the market.
Precisely. The outcome is that the pool of available singles under the social optimum is paradoxically larger than the equilibrium pool we actually have, which leads to more high-friction, low-return dating for everyone else. It's a vicious cycle.
Okay, let's get into the 2 theoretical friction scenarios the sources look at, because this is where the academic math gets really surprising. We're looking at what happens when the market becomes either hyper-efficient in learning or hyper-efficient in search.
Let's start with vanishing learning frictions. So lambda approaches infinity. This is a world where you meet someone and you instantly know exactly how compatible you are.
In that case, the benefit of dating is infinite because information is free and instant.
And the model predicts that if learning is instant, people become willing to date everyone. It leads to non-assortative dating, a complete collapse of discrimination. If learning costs nothing, you might as well try everyone.
But that doesn't really capture the market we see today.
No, it doesn't. Now, the second scenario is more disturbing. Vanishing search frictions. Mu approaches infinity. This is the world where you can meet partners instantaneously. You swipe and boom, they're right in front of you.
This one feels closer to the theoretical promise of dating apps.
It is. And if search friction vanishes, if you can always meet someone new instantly, the model says agents will only date the highest pizzazz partners available. And they'll date each one for an infinitesimal amount of time because they are constantly comparing them to the next immediate match.
So what's the result of that hyper-efficiency?
The result is fully assortative dating, where everyone is seeking the absolute highest compatibility. And the theoretical mathematical consequence is that the average number of partners before marriage goes to infinity.
Wait, infinity? That sounds like pure market paralysis. How can meeting partners instantly lead to an infinite dating lifetime before marriage? I have to push back on that. That sounds like academic nonsense.
But it translates perfectly to the anecdotal reports of exhaustion and non-commitment we were just talking about. The theory implies that if the opportunity cost of commitment is always just one swipe away, the ability to meet someone potentially better instantly, a rational agent, especially a high pizzazz one, would never, ever settle.
They're incentivized to hold out for the absolute highest possible match.
Forever.
Forever. They are forever optimizing, and everyone else is just left in the wake of that endless optimization.
So the combination of the long, emotionally draining dating, the overdating problem, and the difficulty of finding a committed partner, especially if you aren't high pizzazz, makes the traditional strategy of role locking seem vastly more efficient. Why would you spend years of emotional and time costs in a market that's designed for endless pursuit and zero commitment? Not when you can enter a calculated, specialized partnership, a stable production partner that immediately solves both your economic uncertainty and your relational insecurity.
It's the ultimate risk mitigation. The modern dating market, designed for fluidity, has become so inefficient at producing committed partnerships that people are rationally choosing contractual rigidity as a shortcut to stability.
And this shift feels almost primal. It suggests humans can only tolerate so much external risk before they seek out internal, rigid structure. Which leads us directly into our third section, exploring this retreat as a fundamental psychological and contractual need for security.
So we're moving from economics and dating theory to the foundational reasons this need for structure is so strong. And we're starting with a classic and highly controversial experiment, John B. Calhoun's Universe 25.
This is the mortality-inhibiting environment for mice, a practical utopia built in the 60s. Abundant food, water, perfect temperature, no predators. It was designed to be a stress-free environment to test the limits of population growth.
And the irony is just devastating. This perfect physical world led to total social destruction, what Calhoun called the behavioral sink.
The population grew exponentially at first, but it wasn't a lack of resources that caused the collapse. It was the breakdown of social roles because of the crowding and the constant social exposure.
The sources describe the collapse mechanism, and it happened way before they hit the physical limits of the space. Males just abandoned defending their territory because it was too stressful. Normal social roles just broke down.
And this led to profound social pathology. A group of males emerged that Calhoun famously called the beautiful ones.
Right. They never fought, never sought sex, never defended territory.
They just ate, slept, and groomed themselves. The research described it as narcissistic introspection.
Completely withdrawn from any meaningful social interaction. And they would just congregate in these listless groups, only interrupted by spasms and waves of pointless violence.
Cannibalism, pansexualism became endemic. Mothers stopped protecting their young. It was a complete social breakdown.
But the key point is what Calhoun called the first death. The population peaked, and then, even as the numbers started to decline and there was more space, the mice had lost the capacity to rebuild.
They had stopped being able to perform the necessary social behaviors, rearing young, forming bonds, defending roles that define their species. Even though they were physically fine, their spirit, their society was ruined.
Okay, I have to stop you there, because it is really easy to dismiss Calhoun's experiments as outdated and simplistic. We aren't mice. We don't have these rigid, polygamous territorial instincts. So where does the source material justify this analogy for modern humans?
And that's the crucial critique. We have to acknowledge that. The criticism usually centers on anthropomorphizing the mice, but the source material focuses on one specific, powerful idea from it. The design of the space undermined the mice's specific necessary social roles. The confined, high-density, resource-rich world eliminated the need for meaningful effort tied to their biological purpose.
So the problem wasn't the number of mice, it was the meaning of being a mouse.
Yeah.
The utopia of resource abundance made their social contributions irrelevant.
Precisely. So if we apply that as a metaphor, the modern, urban, high-density, low-commitment social structure combined with the exhausting digital dating market, it acts as an equivalent behavioral sink.
So modern life provides the material abundance, the utopian resources, but it eliminates the structured, necessary social roles that give us psychological sovereignty, a sense of purpose.
I see the connection now. The economic volatility and the dating market paralysis, they reinforce that lack of social meaning. If I'm a man or a woman who feels they have nothing to offer despite being stable, or if I'm constantly ghosted, I am experiencing a collapse of my social role.
And the result is psychological withdrawal, a modern parallel of the beautiful ones. narcissistic introspection, listlessness, social atomization. And so the strategic retreat to traditional roles becomes a biological defense mechanism against the evolutionary mismatch of the digital age. It creates an artificial, rigid structure, a specialized role, that counters the crushing meaninglessness of the sync.
So it's not about finding a partner who completes you. It's about finding a defined, specialized role that stabilizes you. You trade abstract freedom, which, as Maya said, is too expensive for tangible psychological sovereignty inside a defined contract.
And that need for a rigid contract is reinforced by the final major piece of this puzzle, the contractual asymmetry of modern matrimonial law. This is where the emotional and biological drive meets the legal necessity for protection.
Right. Let's talk about unilateral divorce, or UD. The adoption of no-fault unilateral divorce laws just fundamentally altered the contract of marriage. It went from a mutual commitment device to something one party can easily exit.
And the data shows that lowering that exit cost was a binding concern for people. The sources say that when unilateral divorce was introduced, marriage rates significantly declined in those states. People understood the commitment device had been weakened.
But the nuance here is critical. It wasn't just unilateral divorce on its own that caused the steepest drop.
Right.
The really significant fall only happened when states adopted both unilateral divorce and no-fault divorce, specifically for property settlement agreements, or PSAs.
So changing the legal commitment device only became truly unattractive when that easy exit was also coupled with the removal of fault-based protections for assets.
This is critical. It implies people weren't just worried about a partner leaving easily, they were worried about the easy extraction of accumulated assets upon that easy exit. The contract became fundamentally risky for wealth preservation.
From a behavioral economics perspective, the low legal cost of exiting marriage just reduces its function as a commitment device, especially for shared financial and psychological investment.
And for the partner who is specializing in career advancement and accumulating assets, this legal asymmetry creates a tangible risk to their asset security and their psychological sovereignty.
And we already established we're in a K-shaped economy, where job security outside the Mag 7 is precarious and personal debt is high. In that volatile world, why would a professional aggressively pursue asset accumulation if half of those assets can just be easily extracted under a no-fault PSA?
It creates a massive disincentive for investment into the partnership. You risk specializing in financial production only to have those assets split easily later on. That risk is exponentially magnified by the economic instability of 2026.
So the strategic retreat to traditional specialization, Maya quitting her job, or a man looking for a partner who focuses on domestic security, that can be seen as a calculated attempt to reestablish certainty, to hedge against the high financial risk in these modern low-commitment contracts.
They're essentially negotiating an implicit contract that sits on top of the flawed legal one. By agreeing to role locking, one partner specializes in high-income financial production, the other in low-risk domestic entropy reduction. They dramatically increase their mutual dependence, and therefore, the non-legal cost of exiting the arrangement.
They're strategically building a contractual firewall. By maximizing their specialization, they make the household unit so efficient and interdependent that breaking it up requires far more complexity than the simple legal mechanism of unilateral divorce.
They are raising the social and economic complexity of divorce to counteract the simplicity of the legal mechanism. And by doing that, they reclaim asset security. It's a sophisticated hedge against volatility, using traditional roles not for nostalgia, but as highly efficient survival tools.
It seems like it solves everything at once, both the macro risk of economic volatility and the micro risk of legal fluidity and social atomization.
It seems the traditional roles, the specialization, have returned because the modern, fluid, dual income structure, for all its individual freedom, simply can't withstand this unique combination of 2026 economic polarization, high personal debt, and weak legal commitment devices.
Two half-committed, semi-independent salaries are a much higher risk than one fully specialized high earner and one domestic specialist who is focused on reducing that survival entropy.
That is the synthesized conclusion. The environment has become so hostile that the rational middle-class individual now sees autonomy not as a benefit, but as a luxury they can no longer afford. They seek specialization because it's the most efficient path to stability.
This has been an eye-opening journey. moving from Maya's spreadsheet to the behavioral sink and then all the way to divorce law. I mean, we've really confirmed that this strategic retreat is deeply rooted in these external, non-moral pressures.
To synthesize everything, the 2026 economic environment stagflation, the K-shaped economy, GFC-level consumer debt, and corporate concentration has made individual economic independence dangerously precarious for the middle class.
And that macro instability is just reinforced by the micro-level failures of the dating market. A market driven by high pizzazz agents and elevated breakup thresholds that's inefficient creates overdating and just results in exhaustion and social paralysis.
And the confluence of all these factors, it validates Maya's cold-blooded audit. The return to traditional roles is, at its core, a strategic calculation for survival. It's an effort to de-risk one's life by creating a specialized, high-commitment household unit, a stable production partner that directly counters economic volatility and social atomization. It's a rigid structure to protect against the psychological collapse we see in the behavioral sink metaphor.
And by adopting that rigid specialization, they are building a contractual firewall, structurally increasing the cost of exiting the arrangement to counteract the low legal exit costs of unilateral divorce laws.
The key takeaway is this. When volatility and legal fluidity increase the perceived personal cost of modern autonomy, people will rationally choose contractual rigidity and specialization as the most efficient way to survive and preserve their limited assets. The strategic retreat confirms that the cost of freedom, the freedom to pursue an independent, non-specialized path, has simply become too high for the middle class to afford in this specific environment.